This is a custom magnetic faceplate template for the Soundcraft Ui24R digital mixer. In order to modify the template, you are going to need access to Adobe Photoshop. Now in this example, I have a left section as well as a right section. Now I want to go ahead and modify the text. Before I do that, I will mention that in this case, I'm using a band title and logo. Here, I'll just show you and move that. The reason why I do that is I happen to personally be in multiple band projects, and this allows me to easily swap these magnetic templates on and off very easily between the projects, but not getting them confused between bands. In this example, though, we want to go ahead and expand the port text, then the port labels, preamp row 1, and then you want to find the preamp that you want to modify. You'll see this little icon here for the font logo. Double click that, and then up on the left here, you'll see I will modify it to whatever I want. You could also change the color of it. So go back up to color overlay for port labels. I'm going to double click on that and change the color to whatever I want. Next thing I'll talk about is the background. So in this case, I have a simple black background. You may want to change that color, so I'll go ahead and do that. Before I do that though, I'm going to show you, in this example, I have an inner glow. Now why I did that is maybe you're cutting this by hand and you want, guidelines. So you can enable that and you'll see it does this little thin gray outline. You can easily disable that if you don't want that, but use other effects. So in this case, I'm going to use maybe a color overlay and change to like a blue. You could also maybe use a pattern. If you want to upload your own custom pattern, you can put it on there. You get the idea. The last thing I'll mention is, if you'll notice here on both the left and right hand templates, I have this like jigsaw pattern going along the side. The reason why I did that is originally I had it straight, but it ended up making the wall a little too thin when it got close to those ports, and it would make the magnetic templates a little fragile and they would break very easily. So I decided to go with this jigsaw pattern. It was an easy out, and it makes them pretty strong that way. Now, if you chose to cut this by hand, you would just print it right here in Photoshop. Make sure to choose your paper type. In my case, I'm using magnetic glossy paper. Go ahead and print it, and then using maybe a hand cutting blade, you can cut it manually. For me, I'm going to use a cutting machine. So I'm going to save this as a PNG file and then import it into my cutting program. So I'm going to choose File, Save as a Copy. Make sure the format is PNG. Give it a file name. Click Save, and then make sure to choose the largest file size because you'll need the highest quality when printing. Next, I'll import the template into my cutting program. Now for machine cutting this, I'm going to be using a Cricut Explorer 3. You might be using something similar like a Silhouette or maybe even a laser cutting machine. Regardless, the process will be similar. I've started with a new project, so let's go ahead and upload the media that we created earlier into our library. Click Continue. We don't need to set any transparency options as we've already taken care of that in Photoshop, and we want to choose the Print Then Cut option right here, or Flat Graphic. Click Upload, right into our library. Now you're going to see that the size is going to look a little weird. And that's because we need to set the dimensions. If you look in Photoshop, you'll see that the dimensions are 5.997 inches by 6.413 inches. Next, click Make. You can choose to save the project or not, and click Continue. Then from here, we're going to send it to the printer. Now, in this dialog box that pops up, I like to choose Add Bleed, as the cutting device doesn't always cut exactly on the lines, so we want to add a little extra ink bleed around those edges. I also like to use the system dialog box for the print options. Click Print. If you're on a Macintosh like me, you might have the screen go to the background. Just click and drag this down, bring this forward. I like to choose a couple options here. One is I'm going to feed from the rear tray. That's just where I have my magnetic paper. I also like to choose the media type of photo. And on the printer itself, I made sure to choose Glossy 2 if I choose photo or even plain paper. It ends up adding too much ink and it tends to run on the paper. This adds the perfect amount. Click Print. Once complete, hopefully your print should look something similar to this. Before sending the material through the cutting device, it's always a good idea to remove any air bubbles first. Okay, so we've printed the material. Now we need to send it to the cutting machine. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using a Cricut Explore 3. I'm going to choose magnetic paper. 0.5 millimeters is all I need, and I don't need that much pressure, so I'll choose less. Next, we go over to the device and load the material into the cutting machine. At this point, most cutting machines are automated and fairly quick. When removing the magnetic paper from the cutting mat, I find it's a good idea to use a spatula knife to help guide it off, to help prevent any curling or bending of the final product. And we're done. Now, as you can see, adding, changing, or removing any of these magnetic templates is pretty quick and easy. As you can see in this example, I'm doing this one-handed while I'm filming with the other. So swapping these out for maybe different bands you're in or different projects is pretty quick and easy. As always, I look forward to any comments or questions you have. Make sure to check out the video description below for a link to a download of the template.